Assalamu alaikum. Hi guys, this is Sarah. Today I wanted to tell you a story about my issues with my family about not having kids, and as well as give you guys some tips if you're kind of in the same boat. Now, this is intended for people who either do not want to have kids or are maybe having issues with fertility or medical issues that are causing them to not be able to have children right now, or maybe they, not be able to have children at all. Also, if maybe you're waiting to have kids for a while and you're figuring out how to deal with them in the meantime, hopefully this is helpful to all of you guys right now. So as far as for myself, I have been married to my husband for going on 7 years now, and we are very happily married. However, the first few years of my marriage, I did get a lot of questions about having children. For me and my husband, when we first started dating, we did discuss about having kids, and we were both kind of on the boat of like, yeah, like maybe one day kids sound good, but like we're not really into it right now. I mean, we met when we were very young. And so we had no plans to have kids, especially until we were more financially stable. So the first couple years of our marriage, we'd get all those little comments like, haha, when are you guys having kids? Stuff like that, especially in the Muslim community. You guys know that people are always asking if you're a married couple when you're having kids, if you don't have kids. So it can get kind of to be a lot. So, for the first couple years, it wasn't that big of a deal, but after a while, it started getting really irritating, especially to me. And for those women out there, I'm figuring that probably most of you who are listening to this for advice are women, that it gets to be very invasive about you and your body, and you feel like you almost have to defend your body and your choices as a woman more than you do as a man in the couple. And so because you're carrying a baby, and it feels like, when you get all these questions about why aren't you guys having kids, it feels like it's all on you as a woman. And so I was having issues with my family, in particular my in-laws, with constantly asking me and my husband if we were going to have kids, telling us, when would be the right time in their opinion for us to have kids, telling us things like, oh, you guys should have kids now because then you'll get free babysitting because we lived with them at the time. And, just stuff like that over time, it gets irritating to you as a couple when you want to make decisions on your own and someone keeps telling you, like, you guys need to have kids right now. And sometimes it's even worded in that way, you guys need to have kids, you guys need to have kids. And I think that those of you out there that are dealing in like an intercultural relationship, especially, might be having a hard time navigating this. I know that for me, I am white, and growing up in a white family, I feel like it's generally considered rude to be too invasive into when people are having kids or things like that. Like, there's definitely absolutely the, hey, when are you guys having kids? Or like the little like funny comments like, that'll be you guys soon, with like kids and that kind of thing. But I think that with brown families and Desi families is definitely like much more directed and pointed, like, when are you guys gonna have kids? When are you gonna start trying? It is too invasive. And so it got to a point where I was getting really annoyed about it, and I talked to my husband. And generally, just to clarify first, generally me and my in-laws do have a very good relationship, and I don't want to like paint them in a bad way by having this conversation, but this is just the truth, guys. Like, this is what happens sometimes when you're in a marriage and when you're dealing with two sets of families and that kind of thing. And some of you might even be dealing with this with your immediate family. So I was starting to get pretty irritated by it, especially because me and my husband have chosen not to have kids for the foreseeable future. We may never have kids, and that decision has come in part due to a decision on our part regarding how we feel about having children, how we feel about whether we want children badly enough to have children, as well as considerations for my health. You guys who have been here before know that I have a very serious medical condition. Because of that medical condition, I have been advised by my doctor that if I were to have a pregnancy, it would be a high-risk pregnancy, and there's a bunch of other factors involving that. So, of course, me and my husband also had to consider that. And so when you have more than one factor, especially, you know, medical issues maybe that are affecting your fertility or your ability to carry a baby beyond just, you know, not really wanting kids as well, it becomes even more like hurtful when people keep asking about children, whether you want them or not, because it feels like an attack almost on your womanhood. And so I was getting very annoyed again. And I had talked to my husband about this a bunch of times, and, you know, quite a few times when it had been mentioned or brought up, he wasn't even there. So it was kind of difficult for us to pinpoint a time to talk to our in-laws about it. And one time my in-laws mentioned it while I was with them alone, and I decided to have a very honest conversation with them. I told them about why we're not having kids and about the reasons behind that. And I figured that it would stop after that. However, again, probably those of you in Desi families, Indian, Pakistani families know the best that that was not what stopped the conversation. Apparently, me explaining myself very openly and honestly was not enough. It actually didn't end up stopping until my husband had to have a conversation with my in-laws and, you know, lay things out for them with him, for the conversation to stop, for us to stop being asked about when we're having kids and to being told we need to have kids now and that kind of thing. And since that time that my husband talked to my in-laws, they have never asked about it again. And I am feeling a whole lot less stressed about it. And so I just wanted to give you guys some tips based on my experience as well, and kind of talk about the dynamics of being in like a childless Muslim couple, because I think that having children is so emphasized in our community that sometimes it ends up being, to some people, the end all be all of marriage. And it's like, oh, you're married, now it's time to have kids. And you know, gotta stop for a second and be like, okay, let these young people develop their marriage before we're trying to force them into, you know, devoting all their time and energy to a small living being who needs all your time and energy to take care of it. You know, let people develop as a couple and in a relationship before we're trying to pressure them into having kids. And by the way, this pressure did not just come from my in-laws. There was plenty of people in the Muslim community who were very pushy as well about us having kids. So just FYI, if you know a Muslim couple that is childless, I've also, you know, talked to a lot of people who don't have children because they're struggling with major fertility struggles, beyond the fact that, you know, I know that I have medical issues which could cause some issues with carrying a child, and but I don't know that I'm infertile. And I don't, you know, desire kids extremely badly. But I can just imagine that pain and hurt of somebody who knows they're infertile, or who has a very, you know, high likelihood that they're infertile because they've been trying for years and years with no success, and that they're having this pain, and the family is bringing up stuff about, oh, you know, why don't you guys have kids? You guys need to have kids. And, you know, in private, they're crying and, you know, praying for a child and they can't have one. So, you know, I can't even imagine some of you who are in that position, and I'm definitely making dua for you that if you really are desiring a child, that may Allah grant you a child. I mean, that's a very sad situation. And I think that for these different types of situations, there's a few different ways that you can approach your family or your in-laws about this discussion. in the end, how you end up talking about this with your family may be different depending on your reasons for not having children, whether they're medical or whether it's a personal choice. But just remember that whatever your personal business is, whatever your choice is, you're in control over that information, and whatever you choose to let your family know is ultimately up to you. Though I do encourage sharing some information with your family, especially if you're a close family, in order to help the situation be more understandable to them. Because especially when there's this cultural break, sometimes without very clear discussion, I feel like it's your thoughts are almost ignored, which I'm not saying are right, but I feel like that's what happens. So I kind of want to give you some tips for how this can go, a discussion like this, if you want to bring it up with your in-laws. So the very first thing that you need to do before you talk to your in-laws about, child pressure or discussing, having kids around you, and trying to tell you to have kids, is you need to have your partner as your ally. In my experience, I was annoyed for a very long time about it, and I didn't say anything to my husband about it for a while, or I would kind of like casually complain about it and not really talk about how much it was bothering me. And it wasn't really until after I had a sit-down conversation with my in-laws that didn't work that I brought my husband in to help me. And it still actually didn't go in the ideal way that I would have wanted it, but hopefully if you guys are in that situation, you'll be a little bit more prepared. But bring in your spouse as your ally, because if we're talking about, like, for example, the most toxic of families, if your spouse is not on your side and they're not willing to stand up to their own parents, for example, and say like, hey, you guys shouldn't be talking to her that way, you guys shouldn't be talking to us that way, this isn't right, then, it creates a wedge between the couple that, there needs to be an appropriate relationship between the parents and the married couple. They're your parents, and yeah, you should respect them, but there needs to be mutual respect both ways. And you know what? I'm not the only one who talks about this kind of stuff, okay? Like, if you guys want some kind of authority figure on it, you can see how many times, for example, Mufti Menk talks about this stuff, that too often there's parents who disrespect the relationship between the husband and wife, and they come between the husband and wife because of that disrespect for the bond that there needs to be in that relationship, and that the parents can't just tell children what to do anymore, in that way, that they can't disrespect their children's relationship and expect their children to only please the parents at the detriment to the relationship. So, I mean, everybody has heard horror stories of the issues where there's, some crazy in-laws who try to come between the wife and the husband because of some issues, sometimes even with fertility and having kids, and they try to convince the husband to divorce the wife because she can't have kids and stuff like that. So, that is absolutely the obvious, like, horror story, and I don't want to freak anybody out by saying this, but it's something that we need to recognize, that if your partner is not willing to stand up to you, stand up for you, there's an issue there. And I understand too, obviously I don't come from the same culture, but I understand that culturally, for a lot of people out there, especially in the Muslim community, it takes a lot to stand up to your parents. That, your entire life you're told that you just have to do what your parents say no matter what, even if they're wrong, even if they're morally wrong, that you have to do what they say. And obviously Islamically we know that that's not right, but how many people let things slip by because they're like, oh, I don't want to cause problems with the family, oh, that's my parents and they're that way, let's just deal with it whenever we see them. No, that's not right. And you shouldn't be putting that on your significant other. If somebody's out there, and this goes for you too, ladies that are out there, that if your parents are creating divides in your relationship with your husband, or you're the husband and your parents are creating divides in your relationship with your wife, you need to look at what your parents are doing and be like, well, if a parent was genuinely concerned for my marriage, excuse me, genuinely concerned for my happiness, wouldn't they want to try to preserve my marriage? And if, you know, your partner isn't obviously doing some kind of toxic thing like abuse and that kind of thing that somebody would have a real reason for saying, hey, there's an issue here, why are people trying to come between a husband and a wife? And, you know, there's plenty of Islamic sayings to back this up that, you know, one of Shaitan's favorite things that Shaitan likes to try to do is come between a husband and a wife. And don't allow that. Don't allow that as a spouse. You should always be sticking up for your spouse. Yes, there's some times that are you know, easier to just let it go. And I would encourage to just let it go if it's something very small. But a lot of times when people have these issues, it's not just the small things, it's the everyday things that add up to bigger disrespect and issues in the relationship. And I could go on with talking about this for a long time, but in this instance, you need to have your partner backing you up, because it's way too easy for toxic family to try to separate people over an issue that's as contentious and powerful as having children. So keep that in mind, because you're going to need your partner as an ally if you're really having problems with your family, and you know, especially if they haven't listened to you when you've talked to them on your own. So I encourage you guys to have a frank and open conversation with whomever it is that is creating the family issue. You know, obviously if it's a ton of people, you're not going to be able to sit down with, you know, your extended family of 20 people who's all pressuring you and be able to say that. But the first place that you can start with, obviously, is your parents or your in-laws, your parents-in-law, if that's the issue, which it tends to be for most cases that I've seen. What I think is best to do is to sit down with your partner and discuss with your parents that your parents or parents-in-law, that you're feeling very hurt about what has been going on. And, you know, it could be something like, you know, mom and dad, mom and father-in-law, I know that you guys haven't intended to do this. However, we both feel very hurt and upset by the way that you guys have spoken to us about having children. We feel that having children is a very personal choice and something that we need to decide on as a couple. And we don't want to invite commentary in that when it is our own personal choice. Something to that effect. You know, you can change it around, but essentially explaining that we don't appreciate this stuff. You may not have intended to, but it's hurtful and it needs to stop. That's pretty much the basis of where it needs to go. That we would really appreciate it if in the future you would hold back from making any comments about us having children. You know, and if you are open enough to your in-laws, you can discuss, especially if you're having issues with fertility, you can say, you know what, we've been trying to have children, and every time we're reminded of this, it's extremely hurtful and sad for us. You know, and I don't encourage, like, I'm not saying like, oh, you should always be guilting people into feeling how you think they should feel about stuff, but sometimes people need a kick of empathy, okay? Sometimes people need some empathy and some sympathy, all right? There's too many people who don't think about other people, who don't think about what they're going through, and sometimes they need to be told that they are hurting you, and that's okay. And look, none of this conversation that I've presented here is disrespectful, but I do understand that in a lot of people's cultures, standing up to your parents at all is going to be considered disrespectful to them. And what I have to say about that is, at what point are you going to have control of your life and not let your parents have total control of your life? And that's probably a hard thing to hear for a lot of people, because I know you guys, that especially, you know, in the cultures that we have in the Muslim community, Desi families, Arab families, that it's like people can't even think of speaking to their parents openly and honestly. It's just not it's just not a thing. And I really encourage you to embrace what comes with being open about how you're feeling and to try to work past those hang-ups, because it's not an Islamic thing to cut yourself off completely from feeling things and to being open with other people and expressing your hurt. It's if you don't want to talk about those things, it's not un-Islamic, but I can't imagine being a parent and encouraging a culture among my family that is so repressive about what people are feeling that my children are scared to come to me. So I encourage you to take this as one of your opportunities to actually have an open and honest discussion with your family if this has not been part of your family in the past. If things have been especially bad with the pressure with your family, maybe they have encouraged your partner to divorce you because there hasn't been children in the relationship, there definitely needs to be actionable items brought up in the conversation, and your partner needs to back you on this. For example, it could be after the discussion about how you're really hurt, you don't want it to happen again, that both of you are hurt and you don't want it to happen again, then, there needs to be a follow-up with, we're not willing to put up with this emotional hurt anymore, and if it is brought up again, we're going to have to leave. Especially if, I know this is harder for those of you who live with your in-laws, but leaving doesn't necessarily mean moving out. I'm not saying that if you can't financially afford that. It can mean that if you need to move out for your relationship, but it could just mean leaving the room, both of you, that you're not going to entertain that behavior from the parents, that you're not going to entertain hurtful and divisive behavior. And I know there's people right now who are listening to this saying, oh, you've got to preserve the family, whatever it takes. And the thing is yeah, you've got to preserve your family, but you've also got to preserve your marriage. And being a doormat for your parents isn't going to preserve your marriage or your family. Think of how many miserable people there are out there that say things like, I never lived my life until my parents died because I was so, concerned about what they were always going to say. Even though they weren't right. I was always concerned about what they say. What about people who've destroyed their marriages, who lost their marriages because they were just a doormat for their parents? And again, that might hurt for some people to hear me say that, but I think that it's the truth. And there needs to be actionable items. You know what? Next time we're going to leave. And guess what? After the end of the night, that's the end of the conversation. Maybe you even expect an apology if the parents decide to bring this up again. And I keep saying the parents, but of course this is for, the people in your life who are making this difficult situation even more difficult if you're having infertility issues, and a reasonable choice as a couple for you to make if you're not having infertility issues. You're just not deciding to have children. Now, after you've had this conversation, which of course should at all times be as calm and respectful as you can possibly make it, that means that next time that something happens with this, next time they're bringing up about, oh, you guys need to have kids, or, oh, crazy suggestions to your husband if you're in this horrible situation that, oh, you should divorce her, or, oh, you should marry a second wife or something like that, that you need to act upon those actionable items again with your partner. If you said in your last conversation you're gonna leave, then that means that you're gonna leave. If you didn't say in your last conversation that you were going to leave, but you brought up the hurt, then this is the time where you say, Mom and Dad, I thought that I had made myself clear last time we had a discussion about this. Next time this happens, partner and I are going to have to leave. And I'm kind of telling you about this stuff that you can give stages to it, because there's people who are genuinely ignorant and don't really understand that they're hurting you, and don't really understand what it means to be in your position. And there's also people who come from cultures where not having children is seen as, being the worst thing in the world, and they'll do any kind of hurtful thing to avoid that. So if you have actionable items, you need to take action on them. And if you didn't give actionable items, you need to begin a series of actionable items because you've already, warned them and let them know about the situation, and they're purposefully hurting you at this point because they know. And obviously following up on actionable items, that is the hardest part. But I have to say, from experience in other kinds of situations, not with this in particular, that I have had a lot of success with this method with people who choose to hurt you over and over again in the same kind of ways, that either they're somebody who will remove themselves from your life because they get so much joy out of hurting you that they no longer find it worth it to maintain a relationship if you're not going to allow them to hurt you, or if they genuinely care about you, which I'm hoping that everybody's in-laws and parents here in this situation, or whoever is in this situation, actually does love and care about you, and that this is part of it, that they'll stop doing it after a while. It might take a few tries, but I found that this works pretty consistently. Essentially, that's my best method for how to deal with this, and over time the questions will become less. Of course, you'll have your own, you might have your own personal issues with your own feelings about it, but if you can take away that element of somebody always talking about it, obviously that helps you with your own personal feelings a lot. And I just wanted, touch on a few things before I wrap it up today. And, that's just a few things. Like, first of all, don't have kids because of somebody else. If somebody else tells you, oh, don't worry, I'm going to financially take care of the kids, or oh, you'll have free babysitting, or whatever reason somebody else gives you, somebody else is not in your womb and is not in your body. And it does not matter what somebody else's opinion is. Your husband, if you're the woman that I'm talking to here, the husband and the wife in this situation are the only two people who should be having a say on whether it's time for them to have kids. And another thing, you can never completely rely on somebody else financially to take care of your children for you. Obviously, we want to be able to trust our parents to take care of our kids and that kind of thing, but everybody knows this isn't the first time that somebody has made promises in order to get somebody else to have kids, and then they realize they just want to be a grandparent. They don't really want the responsibilities that they signed up and promised for. I have heard that as well. Never have a kid for somebody other than yourself. Please don't. I don't want to, say anything that you guys don't already know, but it is difficult to not give into that pressure culturally. And I'm trying to say this with the most understanding, because that is not really the culture that I personally come from. And I just want to say that I do understand that there are people out there who are coming from cultures where you feel like, oh my God, just to get them off my back, let's just have a kid, And you should never let anybody else pressure themselves into your relationship like that. Think about how large of a decision that is to have children. That's one of the biggest decisions that you can make in your life. It's an absolute sentence of taking care of somebody fully at the very least until they become a legal adult by the laws. But also, if you're actually like a decent parent, you will continue to try to have contact and maintain, relationships with your kids that last your entire lifetime. Having children is a very serious decision. Nobody else should ever make it for you. I said before also that it's it's necessary to have your partner as your ally. But I also really encourage you to talk to your friends if you can, to get whatever advice they have to say about it, especially if they're part of your culture and they can have some tips about dealing with parents in a way that's even especially more culturally sensitive. Though personally, I think that being frank is the way that a lot of people will actually take you seriously. Your friends can at the very least be emotional support for you, even if they don't have advice. So I really encourage you to talk to your friends about how you're feeling. Again, everything when it comes to this is your own personal private information, and you are in control with how much you share about it. Even with your friends, if they want to talk about more than you're willing to share, just be like, nah, I don't really want to get into that, but I'm feeling upset about what's been going on with this lately. There's always kind ways to keep out information that you don't want to share about your own personal business, and that's 100% okay and 100% acceptable, however you want to approach it. And the last thing that I want to say, after having like a little bit of a intense conversation here about what you should or shouldn't do, is that there is always going to be people in any culture that love babies and love kids and have so much excitement over having kids. And that's okay. And it's okay. There's some people who go full on, like, nobody should ever be asking you about kids at any time. But I think that really it's culturally normal for almost every culture that, people might make those little jokes about, oh, when you guys having kids, or oh, you guys are next, or, whatever. And I think that the thing to realize is that most people are not being intentionally hurtful, and it's okay to give those people a pass, even if you're a bit on like pins and needles because of other people who have been really seriously pressuring you. And I know that if you're in, especially like I talked about before, a tough situation where you really want children very badly and you can't for whatever reason, that I'm sure that all of those comments hurt. But do your best to try to understand the people who are not intentionally hurting you. And if it's somebody that is close to you, the kindest approach to correcting that behavior is always the best behavior. If, they keep saying things, even if in good spirit, that, are really hurting your feelings. And I'm sure that person, even if they are momentarily embarrassed, is going to feel grateful that you said something to them if they really do care about you. So there's the people to give the pass to, and then there's the people that there needs to be a serious discussion and action about. I would really love to hear from you guys about what you have done if you've been in this same kind of situation. And I'd also love to talk in the future kind of about intercultural marriage and dealing with some of the conflicts there. Me and my husband, I mentioned before that I'm white. My husband is half Indian, half white, but really he was raised far more in Indian way than he really was raised in a white cultural perspective. So there's definitely some things that we've come across with each other. Let me know if you would be interested, especially if some of you guys are dealing with being in an intercultural marriage out there. We've been going strong for 7 years now, and married. We've been actually together for 10 years. But I would love to help you guys out with any questions that you have, or talk about some of the differences and how to work through them as a couple. Anyway, you guys, thank you so much for watching this all the way to the end here, and I hope that I will be seeing you guys soon. Thank you so much for watching, and assalamu alaikum.